My early experience around drugs and things probably started when I was about 15 and a half, 16, smoking some pot. I lived in the country. I sort of felt like I wasn't part of my community. I was a popular kid, but at the same time I knew underneath about my sexual orientation, and I just felt that it wasn't safe to engage around those issues in a rural area. When I discovered pot, I sort of really got into it heavily because it helped me escape that feeling of not quite belonging. I felt like it overcame that inhibition that I had internally around that stuff. Then when I moved to Melbourne, I sort of fell into a scene, and there's quite a large sort of poly-drug use scene in Melbourne, so there was lots of guys doing ecstasy and speed and all that sort of thing, and I did that, but not on it was semi-regular. Sort of a bit hit and miss, like when I go out to parties and stuff, you do a couple of lines and dance all night and then wander home in the morning. I always felt like I was in control of that situation. Maybe it was just youth, you bounce back a bit quicker when you're a bit younger. There was a kind of connectedness that was there from that drug use and from being in that scene as a younger person. That sort of feeling of connection and community was really, really important. Even though I guess when I look back now, maybe it was a bit contrived, I needed that connection with other people. Just a means of getting to that point. I guess it would have been probably about 10 years ago now that I tried crystal meth for the first time. A friend of mine had some and said it was really strong, and I just used to do a couple of lines of speed and things like that. And I had this meth, and it superseded any other drug that I'd ever had before. I felt like all of a sudden I'd been living with HIV since I was 19, so a long period of time living as a HIV positive person. The stigma around that, the social stigma and other issues around that made me sort of feel like I was a little bit trapped and a little bit inhibited in my sexual engagement. But when I tried crystal meth, all of that stuff seemed to dissolve away. For the first time in ages, I felt like I was empowered. I felt like I was disinhibited. I felt like, even though I'd discussed HIV status and everything else, I felt like all that stigma, all those barriers and walls that had been built up through living that life had just sort of melted away, and I felt like everybody else. The sex was amazing. It was completely liberating. And, you know, I look back now and it's quite funny because I don't want to sort of promote it or anything, but it was a really important part for me in becoming a bit more disinhibited. I used to have lots of people coming around, and, you know, once you get on a run and you're awake and you're on meth for 3 or 4 days, you end up with, you know, half a dozen people in your living room, and sometimes it felt really surreal. You'd be sitting in the lounge room and just looking around you, and there'd be 5 or 6 guys having sex and, you know, doing all sorts of circus tricks in the lounge room and everything else, and you'd just sit back and think, my God, you know, my house has turned into a sex on premises venue. But at the same time, it wasn't very long before I started to feel like it wasn't the intimacy and connection that I was really starting to crave. It just felt like almost like it was on repeat mode, and it felt like it was pretty much the same, and that I wasn't really genuinely connecting to any of these sexual partners that I had. Sometimes I felt like, because I could maintain an erection for a long period of time and things like that, I felt like that's what they were more interested in rather than me. I felt like I could sort of cut it off, stick it on a suction cup, shove it on the wall, and then go and make a cup of tea, and no one would even notice that I'd left the room. That's how disconnected I felt during some of those sessions. And I guess that's the first signs that I started to see that my use was becoming problematic. It had probably been problematic for some time before that, but that was the first time that internally I started to feel signs that there's something not quite going right here. And so, look, the friends that have sort of had a bit of a go at you about how you're looking, about where you've been, that you've been a bit disconnected, that you're not reliable anymore, you're not accountable, all of those people were the first to go. So they were the people that I jettisoned straight away, those people that would really question me. And I look back, and at times, there was about a 5-year period there, and I look back at photos, because I'm HIV positive, I think my family, who live in the country, thought that I was sick with HIV or developing AIDS or something or other, and I look at those old photographs and I just look like Skeletor in the background. You know, I'm sort of hanging on the edge of all of them. I'm never in the centre of any photographs. I'm always sort of like lurking, like some shadow in the background. And I think it's probably just a lot about how I was feeling at that time internally. My world just started to shrink and shrink and shrink. And so I disengaged from family, I disengaged from friends. I stopped using to engage sexually. I stopped using to engage socially. And I'd just sit at home, and the first few times I used by myself at home, you know, I put my headphones on, I was grooving around the lounge room, you know, the music sounded better, everything was terrific. But, you know, here I was just off my face at home by myself, using by myself, not realising that there could be complications because I was an injecting drug user as well. I didn't smoke it. Never thought that, you know, there could be complications of using by myself if something went wrong and no one else was there. None of that entered my mind, and I was just sort of moving off into my own little world. And I think maybe not realising that I had some mental health issues to deal with as well, and just not in the right headspace to even be able to think about dealing with those. But I knew they were present, I knew that they were there. It was taking me longer to recover from my use. And then I started going through a situation where I'd be using at home, and as soon as I'd use, I'd just put my head in my hands and I'd start persecuting myself with really bad negative self-talk. You're useless, you're hopeless, you're fucked. Look at you, you've blown your life, you've fucked everything up, you've lost complete control, you could have done anything with your life and look at you now, you're sitting in this commission flat, you're on a disability support pension, you've got no future, you've got no friends, you've got no family around you, you're just useless. And this negative self-talk for hours and hours and hours, and so much so that sometimes I'd just be in tears, and sometimes I'd be thinking, kill yourself, just kill yourself. You've got nothing left to, you know, you've had AIDS since you were 19, you're going to die anyway, it'll get you eventually anyway, just kill yourself. In this isolation, in this tiny little world that was shrinking and shrinking and shrinking, I only had my own thoughts, my own unbalanced thoughts to bounce things off. And I guess that's when I realised that things were really out of control, but I didn't know what to do to change that. And I kept using. I had really, really bad rotten teeth in my mouth, and there was one that was really, really painful that wouldn't come out, and so I just pulled out this dental floss and put the dental floss around my teeth and just cut until this tooth fell out on the table. I just had this instant flash of reality that came back to me amongst all this delusion, and I'm sitting there with these rotten teeth in my hands and with blood all over me, just thinking, where are you? Where have you gone to? What's going on with you? You really need some help, you know? I'd stopped antiretroviral medication for my HIV, thinking that would fasten up the process of me dying, which I thought was going to be the inevitable conclusion of my lifestyle at that time. I thought, you're going to die, so let's just make it a bit quicker. Let's stop taking your antiretrovirals. I was frustrated and I was still using, and so I just decided that I'd never used heroin before. I lived in a pretty rough area in commission flats and things like that. There were lots of heroin users around me, and I thought to myself, that's how you're going to do it. I decided that when my next payment would come in, that instead of spending that $300 on crystal meth, I'd go upstairs to where the dealer lived and I'd buy $300 worth of heroin and have an overdose, and that'd be it. And so I did that. I went upstairs, I bought $300 worth of heroin, went back downstairs to my little flat. I probably sat there, it was probably the calmest that I'd felt for weeks and weeks and weeks, and I spent a day just cleaning the house, organising my things, writing a few letters to family members and things like that, and just getting my business into order. And then I laid on the couch with a photograph of my partner who'd passed away a few years earlier, and I just thought, this is it, I'm going. And so I injected all of this heroin in this one hit. About 12 or 13 hours later, I just woke up on the couch in a pool of my own vomit and shit. And I opened one eye and I thought, fuck, you're still here. You're meant to still be here. As soon as I opened that one eye, I thought, you're still meant to be here. because if you were supposed to be gone, you'd be gone. So you've got to pull your finger out and you've got to make a change, and it's got to happen today.